Okay, anytime you're ready.
So our topic is mental disorders, which leads us to our question. How can we better treat those with mental disorders in society and in hospitals?
So this starts with the history. The first psychiatric hospital opened in 1752 under the name of Pennsylvania Hospital and stayed open until 1998. So the peak of mental hospital abuse happened in the 1700s when people were put in these mental hospitals to be separated from others in society. The popular treatments during this time are rotational therapy, hydrotherapy, insulin shock therapy, metrazole shock therapy, electroconvulsive shock therapy, and lobotomy. So first we'll start with the rotational therapy. It was created in the 19th century by Erasmus Darwin when a box would be put around the patient's body or head and they'd be swung around in a circle until they experienced vomiting, vertigo, or uncontrollable bowel movement. And it was used to control out of control patients. Next is hydrotherapy. It was created in the 17th, 18th century and was first known as the bath of surprise. There, people would be put into a cage or a plank and be dropped into ice cold water without warning in order to sedate them. This later turned into hydrotherapy when people were mummified and restrained from the head down, and they'd be put into a bath of hot or cold water for multiple hours to days at a time. Next would be insulin shock therapy, which was created by Manfred Sackel in 1927. Here, he overdosed a diabetic schizophrenic on insulin, and this caused a drop in blood sugar, major convulsions, and a coma. In order to revive the patient, they had to be administered glucose or else they would die. People, when they woke up, they seemed that their mental disorder was gone. And this would be administered to them daily for months at a time, up to 60 treatments. And this caused amnesia in the patients. And it declined in 1905 when tranquilizing drugs was introduced into psychiatric hospitals. Next would be metrazole shock therapy, which was created in 1935 by Laszlo von Meduna. Here, the metrazole caused seizure-like convulsions and shocks in the patients. And it was so bad that people even fractured their spine. In 1939, in a study by New York State Psychiatric Institute, found that 40% of patients fractured their spine. And this leads into electroconvulsive shock therapy, which was created in 1938, introduced from Italy, that had less of a risk of spinal fracture due to muscle relaxers and anesthetics. But it caused suicidal tendencies in the patients. And lastly is the lobotomy. It was created by Antonio Egas Montes in 1935. And this is where two holes were drilled into the side of a patient's brain, and pure ethyl alcohol is administered into the prefrontal cortex. This had mixed results because some people had relapse in their psychiatric problems or had no change. But this won him the Nobel Peace Prize in 1949, and in 1946, a new version of lobotomy was created where a thin pickling instrument is shoved into the back of the eye socket to sever the prefrontal cortex and the thalamus. This caused apathy, agitation, and lack of concentration, and was banned in 1967 due to a brain hemorrhage.
So now to the social and cultural aspects of mental illnesses in our society. Firstly, social stigma. Stigma is a negative impact and view towards a certain group of people. While the majority towards the mentally ill in our society are positive and negative, well, there are positive and negative views, the majority is negative, and this stigma can range from sex to abuse and can cause segregation and even employment, which I will go more into later. The audience can range from peers into parents, which brings me to my next point, parental problems. Telly Moses, a psychiatrist, stated that factors serve to rather than help parents' inclination as related to their children who have mental illnesses. This in turn can cause self-blame and hereditary guilt. Brian Ahamande, who is also a psychologist, stated that mental stigma can also be self-caused, and this in turn can cause similar side effects such as self-pitying and fear of control. Onto false notions, there are myths such as myths towards the difference in relationships, empathy, and activities towards the mentally ill. Kimberly Scott, another psychiatrist, debunked these false notions in a study in which two groups of students, one with mental illnesses and one without, were put together and studied in their daily activities, which again debunked these false notions. Onto employment, people may not be willing to hire or work with mentally ill people. Therefore, a lesser percentage of these people are being employed. The National Alliance on Mental Illness states that approximately 80% of the unemployed are mentally ill, and 60% of 7.1 million of these people want the chance to work but are unable to get it.
Alright, so this leads to the economic aspect of this. So I want to discuss the effectiveness and the cost of treatments. So the effectiveness of treatments. So positive results of treatments are generally seen in the long run rather than the short run. So they can't really be seen in the span of a couple of days, but rather a couple of years. So treatment is also very variable for mental illnesses and are generally coupled along with other treatments such as supportive counseling, self-help groups, vocational rehabilitation, income assistance, and perhaps even more. Thomas Insel, a former director of the National Institute of Mental Health and the co-founder of MindStrong Health Organization, has stated that some 85% of severely depressed patients responded to electroconvulsive therapy or ECT, and that among people with schizophrenia that received treatment, 75% got better in the long run, or over the span of 10 years. So this leads me to the costs. So statistics shown by Statista, which is basically an organization that collects data, shows that in the very bottom, since you can't read it, it's 1986, there's $31.8 billion spent in mental health services, while its prediction in 2020 is that there will be $238.4 billion spent on mental health services. So I want to focus on how in 2003, $100.3 billion was spent on mental health services, and in 2017, $203.6 billion was spent on mental health services. So obviously there's a clear increase that has nearly doubled. However, in 2003, the $100 billion that was spent, 45% of it was spent on professions and prescription drugs that may or may not work, rather than spending more of it on mental hospitals or institutes, which can lead to a huge problem.
Ethics deeply ties in with our topic, mental disorders. This is due to a society's perception towards people with mental illnesses. According to Dr. Neil Struch, a psychologist, people treat those who have mental disorders with hesitance, whether it is on purpose or an accident. This is because of human defense mechanisms that we've adapted for survival since the very early years of human civilization. So, what is the proper way to interact with them? According to Dr. Bruce Link, a research scientist at New York State Psychiatric Institute, it is necessary to be aware of a person with mental problems and the danger they may or may not inflict on other people. This is where a dilemma is shown. In some cases, it is seen more ethical to think about the positives rather than the dangers that these people hold. That was according to the American Psychological Association. An example of where this could be applied to is when a mother has a violent and autistic child. It is seen to be more ethical for the mother to continue having a positive mindset rather than fearing her child because her safety is at risk.
So this finally leads into our solution. Our solution is to educate the public because, like Alexis said, a lot of people do not hire those with mental disorders because that they don't know that they're actually capable or don't know how to properly interact with them. Next would be a budget redistribution because, like Helen said, a lot of things, the money that is allotted, a lot of people spend it on things that are unnecessary since a major amount of it is spent on drugs that don't even work. Next would be research on treatments because, as you can see from my lens, a lot of the treatments that were used, they were actually abusive or didn't even help them at all. And then lastly, workshops in schools because, as Sam said, a lot of children feel guilt towards themselves or their parents feel guilt because they are being because they have guilt towards giving their child that mental disorder or they feel like they are out of place. So if they're treated from a young age that this is okay and they are taught how to interact with them, then they would actually not have a problem and this would pass on into adulthood.
As for the implications, so firstly, workshops would help increase tolerance, coexistence, and understanding in school environments. Public socials would be similar to the workshops, but a different generation of adults. In the reallocation of budget, because of this budget, we may have to cut into taxpayers' money, which in turn can cause controversy in our society.
Okay, so this leads to limitations. So the first one I want to discuss is stubbornness, because people with mental illnesses may be stubborn to get treatment, while those without mental illnesses can be stubborn to try and learn or understand those that do have it. And the next one I want to discuss is costs, because the costs generally derive from taxes, which we really don't want to pay more of. And the last one I really want to discuss is class time, because in order to implement this, we need to take time away from other subjects and classes in order to put the time in to learn about mental illnesses, which can be a problem.
And of course, with every solution, there are pros and cons. The pros include increased awareness, better treatments, less abuse towards those with mental illnesses in hospitals and society, and more happiness. The cons, however, include taxpayers being unhappy that their money is going towards these situations. It is a costly solution, and also there's a time delay implementing the solution into society.
Thank you.
My questions ready, sorry. Okay, Alexis. What is a way in which your team's resolution makes you think differently about your own individual research?
So in my own individual research, I talked mostly about the implementing of maybe educational programs in schools, because my actual essay was focused more so on children, but the actual implementation of socials as a whole would help more generations, which I thought would help my essay.
Gabby,
Yes.
what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' individual reports that you decided to exclude from your team presentation, and why?
Well, for Sam, she wrote a lot about specific cases in which people were treating their kids with mental disorders through surgeries and things like that. And we decided to exclude it because we didn't have enough time to talk about each individual thing. And it seemed really off topic since hers was more on ethics as a whole instead of individual cases.
Okay. Sam, in what way did you improve your ability to work with a group as a result of this project?
So before working with this group, I had a lot of trouble managing my time wisely, and what my group members did was they strictly enforced the group norms on me, so it gave me more motivation to continue working hard and proving myself to them that I could get on top of things.
Okay. And Kellen, describe how the content of the team presentation was changed as a result of group discussion.
So originally, the content of our team presentation was basically going to cover the entirety of mental disorders. However, that topic was generally too broad to do thorough research on it, so we narrowed it down to more towards treatments in order to get the specific details needed to convey our thoughts through. So I think that is what really changed throughout our presentation and throughout our topic in general.
All right, good. Well done.